Hi everyone, Fenris Models here, and today I'll show you how to paint up this Parasaurolophus from Tamiya in 1/35th scale. Assembly for this kit is pretty straightforward. There's not a lot of parts and nothing is terribly complicated. Each piece was removed from the sprue with a pair of side cutters and cleaned of any excess plastic with a fresh hobby blade. A bead of Tamiya extra thin cement was run along every join. To help with seam removal, since, an animal shouldn't have a seam running down the center of its face, what I like to do is put a little more cement than necessary and really squeeze the part in place so some of the melted plastic kind of oozes out. This will get cleaned up in a minute with a hobby blade, but it reduces the need for putty by serving a similar role. However, even with this technique, some puttying will still be necessary. Tamiya Basic Type Putty, the one with the orange cap, is put on a palette and thinned with some Tamiya airbrush cleaner. You can also use extra thin cement instead, since it and airbrush cleaner are effectively the same product, but airbrush cleaner is cheaper. In fact, airbrush cleaner is actually what I use to refill my extra thin bottles. A toothpick is then used to apply the thinned down putty. I'm really only applying it to any seam line that wasn't effectively removed with the excess extra thin, so mainly at the hip and shoulder joints as well as the base of the neck. Once applied, the applicator brush on the extra thin is used to feather out the putty. This is important so we don't lose any of that scale detailing. If we didn't feather this out, it would show under all the paint and ruin the effect. You'd almost be better off just leaving the seam lines in that case. And don't worry about the putty getting dissolved into the extra thin. It doesn't hurt it none, and if anything, it actually makes future applications a little stronger of a bond since it will get some of that putty applied. Once the putty had dried and cured, the entire model received a base of Vallejo Mecha Color Orange, 69.007. Now, I had mentioned in the unboxing that I'd be trying something new with this one. A buddy of mine challenged me to paint up a dinosaur in the cel-shaded style, sometimes also referred to as anime style or comic style. For those unfamiliar, what sets cel shading apart is its use of hard transitions between colors, so no fading, blending, washes, pre-shading, or any of those techniques you usually see me use. From here on, all colors will be applied with a brush. The underbelly was picked out in IJN Ash Gray 71.311. For this, I just picked some places where it felt natural enough and colored it in, making sure to leave a sharp, clean line between it and the orange. For a pop of color, I decided to pick out the head in Mecha Color Electric Blue 69.020. Blue and orange are complementary colors, so they make each other seem brighter and more saturated. It does look a little jarring this early on, but in the end it will work out well. And that is one thing I will say about the style, it's very much a trust the process sort of thing. It's going to look odd and feel messy up until the very last step when we do all the black lining. Another thing to note here is that it's very important to try your best to get the lines to match up on each side of the head. It doesn't need to be perfect, but unless you're purposefully going for an asymmetric look, you want the blue to be applied as evenly as possible. So we have orange and blue, now we need something relatively neutral for patterning within the orange. For this, I selected some Model Color Mahogany Brown 70.846. Here, I just sort of freehanded some lines and patches. You can go as wild as you'd like with stripes, spots, really whatever. I chose to keep it fairly basic, but feel free to do as much or as little as you personally want. That's part of the fun of painting dinosaurs after all. You can really do whatever looks good to you. The thing to keep in mind the whole time though is you'll be needing to repeat it on the other side. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect, but you want to make sure you match it up as best as you can. And then lastly, the beak and the toes receive a coat of Model Air Gray 71.047, and that'll wrap up all of our base coloring. With all the base colors down, we can now start shading and highlighting. As mentioned before, the key thing about cell shading is that there's a clear line between each color. This includes between the base color and its shadows and its highlights. For the blue, I used Game Color Night Blue to pick out all of the spots where the shadows are gathering. For this, you just simply pick a place where the light's coming from and draw in your shadows and highlights. For me, I chose to have the light coming from above and forward of the model. Using that same imaginary light source, the highlights were put in with IDF Blue 71.113. Next, I moved on to shading the brown with Model Color Hull Red 70.985. Because the patches were already higher up on the dinosaur, this was mostly kept to the wrinkles, the creases where the ribs were located, and the bottom of the tail where it started to round inward and below. Once the shadows were in, it was time for the highlights. Model Air Wood 71.077 was used for this portion. Now, I know what you're thinking. The highlights seem quite bright for the base color, and the shadows are very dark, and well, yeah, those are the same thoughts I was having at this point. This is sort of what I meant earlier, though, about this being a trust the process type thing. I knew that while it looked too stark now, once it was all down and the black lining applied, it would then tie everything together. What you should start to see is I shade the orange with Model Air Red 71.269. A big component here with the orange is to make sure that the shading is consistent with the other two colors. That way when you're through, it should look like just three colors, orange, blue, and brown, with unified shadows and highlights. Just keep that in mind while drawing in your final shadows. And while the footage plays in the background, one thing I wanted to make sure to mention is to keep those lines between the colors nice and sharp. I didn't get any recording of it, but there were a few times I needed to go back with the previous color to straighten up a line or to clean up the edges. Just don't be afraid to go touch them up every now and again. With the red in place, we can then highlight the orange with the 50-50 mix of that Mecha Color Orange and Model Air Yellow RLM04 71.078. I probably could have gone more in with the yellow and made it a little brighter, but I still think it looks pretty good all the same. The last bit of detailing before we get onto the black lining is picking out the eyes in German Gray 70.995, followed by more of that IDF Blue. And then we can start in on that final step, the black lining. As the name implies, we're going to be taking some Model Air Black 71.057 and using a liner brush, we'll paint the lines that give the style its anime-like appearance. There are two main things that I'm focusing on for these. The first is for breaking out the colors and giving separation to the blue on the head, the orange on the body, the brown on the patterning, and the underbelly. The second is for breaking out any major details, such as where the legs meet the body, any deeper skin wrinkles, between the toes, that sort of a thing. Now, because this is replicating an ink pen on paper, we don't need to worry about the lines being a perfect thickness or anything like that. Having a little variance here will actually make it feel more like something being pulled from the pages of a comic and turned 3D. Same with the lines for themselves. For more gentle curves and edges, you don't have to have the line drawn all the way and can instead break it up a little. Now, I definitely recommend using a liner brush for this stage. Liner brushes are long, thin bristle brushes that hold a good bit of paint. Because of that, with their length, it's really easy to get a nice clean line. It does take a little bit to get used to compared to the strokes you'd make with other brushes, but that's easily rectified with just a little bit of practice on some spare sprue or plastic. And once everything's lined, we can call this one good. And there we go, Tamiya's Parasaurolophus in 1/35th scale, painted up in a cel-shaded style. I absolutely love how it turned out, but as I've mentioned a few times already, it really was one that I was unsure about up until the end there. It's also given me some ideas for next time I try this technique. For example, I'm considering using 2 or even 3 colors for each highlight and shadow. The more colors you add, the more gradated it'll look. But what do you think? Were you also surprised at how much the black lining pulled everything together as I was? And would you consider giving the style a go on one of your own kits? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you, Cali Bear, and all of my starter set patrons. Your support is invaluable and keeps this channel going. And thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this build, make sure to like the video and subscribe to see more of this sort of stuff. If you really like my content and are so inclined, perhaps consider stopping by my Patreon and help me keep stocked up with all of the paints and materials I use for these videos. Rather just watch more of my content? How about this video here of my last big dinosaur build? Or this one here that YouTube thinks is just right for you? Regardless, thank you again for stopping by, and until next time, stay safe and keep modeling.